In 1984, a father and his young son disappeared while fishing on a quiet lake near Spooner, Wisconsin. The boat was found drifting by a dock the next morning, rods still inside, a cooler half full, no sign of struggle. For 18 years, there was no trace of either of them. But in the summer of 2002, a retired angler snagged something beneath the water that would unravel a mystery long buried. That angler's name was Vernon Klein, and today he stands alone on the rotting wood of the old dock, the fog curling around, his ankles like fingers reaching from the past. The morning air hangs dense with moisture. Not a bird sings, not a ripple disturbs the glassy lake surface. The only sound is the soft creak of the dock beneath Vernon's weight as he takes another cautious step forward. He's been coming here since he was 16, caught his first walleye on this lake, brought his father's ashes here when he passed. This lake knows his whole story, but it's what the lake never gave back that's haunted this town, and Vernon, since that summer of 1984. The Granger boys, Paul and little Ethan. Vernon pulls his hood tighter around his weathered face and glances at the tackle box at his feet. It's battered and dented from years of use, but inside, among the rusted hooks and worn lures, is something far more valuable, a laminated fishing license, curled and faded, bearing a name that stopped his heart cold. Ethan Granger. He found it tangled in the weeds 2 mornings ago, when his line snagged on something heavy and unmovable. At first he thought it was just junk, an old tire, maybe a piece of machinery discarded decades ago. But when he tugged harder, something broke loose. A piece of torn fabric, a small red and blue windbreaker, and in the front pocket, the license. He hadn't told anyone yet, not even his wife, Loretta. He couldn't, not until he was sure, not until he went back and pulled the rest of it up. Whatever it was, he'd marked the coordinates. His fish finder, usually reserved for schools of base, had recorded the spot perfectly. Now standing on the dock, he can't stop thinking about that morning in '84. It was a Sunday, hot, even at sunrise. He remembered seeing Paul and Ethan heading toward their boat, Paul with his usual thermos of black coffee, Ethan skipping beside him, excited for a day on the lake. They'd waved. Vernon had waved back. That was the last time anyone saw them. The search lasted weeks. Helicopters, dogs, volunteers combing the woods. The sheriff's department dragged the lake for days. Not a single body, not a single clue. Only the boat, found adrift near the northern shore. Inside, 2 rods, an untouched sandwich, a few crushed cans of cola. Paul's green flannel folded neatly on the bench. No signs of violence, no blood, no struggle. Theories bloomed like algae, accident, drowning, a sudden storm. But there hadn't been one. Others whispered darker things. Paul had gambling debts. He'd been seen arguing with a man outside his garage days before the trip. Some believed he'd staged it, faked their deaths, run off. But that never sat right with Vernon. Paul loved that boy, everyone knew it. And Ethan was full of life. The kind of kid who left notes for his mom, drew pictures of fish with smiling faces, and kept a jar of bottle caps he swore would be worth money someday. Margaret Granger never accepted the accident theory. For years, she sat on this very dock, every Sunday staring out at the lake, hoping, praying, waiting for something, anything to break the silence. She eventually moved to Illinois. Couldn't stand the quiet anymore. Now Vernon wonders if he should call her, tell her what he found. He shakes his head slowly. Not yet. Not until he knows more. The cigarette between his fingers burns low, the ash trembling before falling onto the dock. He crushes it beneath his boot and steps toward the edge. His old aluminum boat is tied there, gently rocking in the breeze. He's already packed his gear, grappling hooks, dive lights, a waterproof camera. This isn't just fishing anymore, this is something else. A kind of penance. Because back then, Vernon had heard something on the lake. The morning they vanished. A shout, just once. Distant, muffled by the trees. He didn't think much of it at the time. Thought it was just a kid fooling around. But it wasn't. He knows that now. He let it go. And maybe that silence cost someone their life. Now, 18 years later, the lake is giving something back. Not much. Not everything. But something. Vernon steps into the boat and unties the rope. The engine sputters, then rumbles to life. He glances once more at the shore, then pushes off, the boat cutting a soft path through the morning mist. As the shoreline fades behind him, a thought takes hold. If the jacket was down there, if that license was down there, what else might be waiting in the deep? He tightens his grip on the wheel. Today, he's going back to find out. In the summer of 1984, Margaret Granger was 32 years old and had already buried too many dreams. Her hands smelled of lavender from the soaps she made in her spare dime. Her kitchen always warm with cinnamon and grief. She worked nights at the county hospital and spent her days trying to hold together what little peace they had left. Paul was supposed to be her calm in the storm. He'd built their home with his own hands, planted the lilacs along the porch, carved their initials into the barn beam the summer Ethan was born. A quiet man, never one to raise his voice except when it came to protecting their boy. Ethan was everything to him, and then, on a cloudless Sunday in July, they were gone. Margaret had packed them a lunch that morning. Peanut butter and banana, sandwiches, 2 apples, and a thermos of lemonade. Paul had smiled, ruffling Ethan's hair before they left. Back before dinner, he'd said. Ethan had kissed her cheek. She remembered the smell of sunscreen on his skin. They never came back. The call came just after sunrise the next day. Sheriff Daniels, flat voice, distant words. We found the boat near Spooner Point. No one inside. Margaret dropped the phone. Before he could finish. Within hours, the lake was swarming with boats, volunteers, deputies. Divers combed the murky depths, while helicopters circled overhead. Dogs sniffed the shoreline. Margaret watched it all from the dock, her face expressionless. Her fingers dug into the wood as if trying to hold the world still. No bodies, no cries for help, no signs of struggle, only that silence, and Paul's flannel shirt, neatly folded on the boat seat. She refused to sell the house. Ethan's room remained, touched. Superman sheet still tucked tight, fishing trophies lined up on the dresser, a school photo taped to the mirror. The smell of childhood lingered like a ghost. Crayons, bubble gum, the faint scent of lake water soaked into old sneakers. Her neighbors called her strong. She hated that word. Strength had nothing to do with it. Strength was a lie people told themselves, to keep moving when their hearts had already stopped. For 3 summers, she waited by the lake every Sunday. She sat on the same bench, wore the same blue windbreaker Paul had gifted her their 10th anniversary. She'd watch the water with eyes that no longer blinked. The breeze carried voices she couldn't hear. Then one morning in late August, she stopped going. In 1987, she left Spooner behind. She moved to Rockford, Illinois, rented a 1-bedroom apartment above a flower shop, found a job managing supplies at a local clinic. She kept to herself, didn't date, didn't decorate. July, she mailed a letter to the Spooner Sheriff's Office, asking if there were any updates. None ever came. She still made lavender soap, still dreamed of Ethan calling for her from the dock, still hated the sound of water slapping against wood. Now, in the summer of 2002, Margaret is 50. Her joints ache when it rains. Her hair grays. In streaks. She speaks little, laughs even less. The world has moved on and she let it until the phone rang yesterday. The voice was shaky, familiar in a way that hit deep in the chest. Vernon Klein, a name from the old town, an old friend of Paul's, a man she hadn't heard from in nearly 20 years. Margaret, it's me. Vernon, from Spooner. She said nothing, just waited. I found something. I think it's Ethan's. Her stomach turned. What did you find? A windbreaker, red and blue, tangled on my line near Spooner Point. Inside, a fishing license. It's old, laminated, says Ethan Granger. Silence stretched. Margaret didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her body just stopped moving. Her breath came shallow. Her eyes locked on the window. She didn't ask for details. Didn't ask if he was sure, because she knew. Something had surfaced. That night, she packed a small bag, 3 changes of clothes, Ethan's last school photo, a comb Paul had left on, their nightstand. She stared at the house around her, at the quiet life she had built from the rubble. And for the first time in 15 years, she opened the red tin box beneath her bed. Inside, time folded in on itself. Drawings Ethan had made, a ticket stub from the movie they saw the week before the trip, a birthday card. To Mom from your little fish. His handwriting, lopsided and precious. She pressed the card to her heart and closed her eyes. Then she bought a train ticket to Wisconsin. The ride north is long and silent. She watches the landscape blur past, cornfields, silos, old barns leaning into time. Trees stretch their arms into the sky like they're trying to hold back the clouds. Margaret doesn't speak to anyone. She barely moves. But inside, everything is shifting. Old grief untangles. Memories rush forward. Paul's laugh echoing down the hall, Ethan's feet thudding on the stairs, the soft splash of water on summer mornings. She clutches the photograph tighter. If Vernon is right, if that jacket truly belonged to Ethan, then the story she thought had ended may still have one more chapter. The lake hadn't changed. As Margaret stepped off the train in Spooner and climbed into the waiting cab Vernon had arranged, the landscape outside the window pulled her into a familiar ache. The pine trees leaned over the road like old sentinels. The sky pressed low, gray and swollen with unshed rain. Everything looked the same, except her. Vernon was waiting at the dock, same battered flannel, same cautious eyes. His hair had thinned since she'd last seen him, and his shoulders curved forward as if the years had been too heavy to carry. He didn't speak at first, just tipped his head in a quiet greeting. Then he reached down into his tackle box and pulled out the bag. "I haven't opened it again," he said, voice gravelly. "Didn't want to touch it too much." He placed the bag gently onto the bench beside her, and Margaret's hands trembled as she peeled back the first layer of plastic. Inside, a small soaked windbreaker, red and blue. The zipper corroded, the cuffs frayed. She stared at it for a long moment, then slowly reached inside the front pocket. Her fingers closed around something slick and stiff. She pulled it out with care, a fishing license. The edges curled, the ink faded, but not gone. Ethan Granger. Age, 9. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The world narrowed to that one square of laminated plastic. The date stamped on it was clear, July 1st, 1984, 2 weeks before they disappeared. She blinked hard and swallowed. "This is his." Vernon nodded slowly. "I thought so." She stared back at the lake. Fog curled across, the surface still thick even at midday. The air smelled of wet bark and old secrets. Somewhere a loon cried in the distance. "He always wore that jacket when you two went fishing," she said almost to herself. "It was too big for him. Paul said it would give him room to grow." Vernon sat beside her. He didn't interrupt. "Where exactly did you find it?" she asked. "About 200 yards out, near the northern drop-off," he replied. "Same place the boat was found drifting back then." She turned to him, something sharp in her voice now. "Why now? Why would it rise after all this time?" "I don't know," Vernon said quietly. "But I didn't just feel the jacket. There was something else down there, heavy, solid, like wood maybe, or metal. It wasn't natural." Margaret stood. Her voice was steady, though her hands still trembled. "Take me there. Now." "Yes." He hesitated. "I haven't gone back out since, didn't want to disturb anything. I don't care. I need to see." Minutes later, they were on the boat. Vernon at the motor, Margaret in the bow, the wind lifting strands of her hair as they cut through the mist. The lake stretched out around them like a mirror to the sky, gray, endless, hiding everything beneath its surface. They stopped where Vernon had dropped a small red buoy to mark the spot. He reached for a grappling hook, and lowered it slowly. Into the water. Margaret leaned over the side, her eyes scanning the surface like it could give her an answer. The hook snagged quickly. Vernon frowned and pulled. It stuck, same as before. He tugged harder and the rope went taut. Then something gave. He reeled it in slowly, hand over hand, water dripping from the line. What surfaced wasn't wood. It was a box, small, rusted, metal edges worn and split in places. A tackle box, dented and half-crushed but still intact. Vernon set it between them carefully. He looked at Margaret. "You want to open it?" She nodded, her throat dry. The latch resisted, then popped. Inside was a mess of rotted fishing line, hooks tangled in clumps, a cracked bobber, and something else, a photograph, folded in half, still damp but preserved within the lid's pocket. Margaret reached for it slowly and unfolded it. It was them. Paul and Ethan, standing on the dock in front of their boat. Ethan was holding a sandwich, with both hands grinning so wide it nearly split his face. Paul stood behind him, his hands resting on Ethan's shoulders, eyes squinting from the sunlight. She traced their faces with her finger. "Who took this?" she whispered. Vernon looked over her shoulder. That doesn't make sense." Margaret turned to him. "What?" "That photo. That's from the day they vanished. I remember seeing Paul wear that shirt, the fish on the back. He only wore it once. Then who took the picture?" Neither of them had an answer. Margaret folded the photo and pressed it to her chest. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said softly, "They weren't alone out here, Vernon." He didn't reply, because in his gut he knew she was right. Something had always felt unfinished. Now the lake was finally starting to talk, and what it had to say wasn't done yet. Detective Miles Rourke hated lakes. He hated the stillness, the smell, the way water seemed to carry secrets longer than any grave. But he especially hated being called out to one 18 years after a case had gone cold. Yet here he was, standing ankle-deep in mud on the shore of Spooner Lake, watching as two soaked figures hauled a rusted tackle box from an old aluminum boat. "Detective Rourke," the older man called out as the boat neared the dock. "Vernon Klein. I'm the one who phoned in." Rourke nodded curtly. "And this is Margaret Granger," the woman said, her voice measured but hard as stone. "My son and husband disappeared on this lake in 1984. Rourke had read the file that morning. Twice, a mechanic and his 9-year-old son. Boat recovered. No bodies, no witnesses. Declared a probable accident, though nothing about it ever sat quite right. Until now. Vernon stepped off the boat first, carrying the box like it might fall apart in his hands. "We pulled this up from the lakebed. Found it tangled on my line. There's a photograph inside. And Ethan's fishing license." Rourke motioned toward a nearby forensic tech. "We'll bag it properly." "No," Margaret said sharply, her eyes locked on the detective. "I want to be there when you open it again. This time with gloves, with care. That box has been waiting. Long enough." Rourke nodded once. They moved into a small tent the department had set up near the dock. A table was cleared. The tackle box, muddy, wet, warped, was laid out under a bright work light. The tech donned gloves, opened the lid, and began removing items one by one. Hooks, weights, crumpled bait wrappers. Then the photo, carefully flattened, placed inside a plastic evidence sleeve. Rourke examined it through the clear surface. It was, exactly as Margaret described, Paul and Ethan standing on this very dock, their boat in the background. Ethan holding a sandwich. Paul with both hands on the boy's shoulders. But in the far left corner, almost cropped out, was something else. A shadow, a shape. Indistinct, but too angular, too upright to be a tree. Rourke leaned closer. "Has anyone seen this before?" he asked. Margaret shook her head. "That picture, I've never seen it in my life. I don't know who took it. It wasn't me." "You're sure it's from the day they disappeared?" "Yes," she said, eyes never. "Leaving the photo. That shirt. Paul only wore it once. He bought it at a thrift store the week before. Said it had good fishing luck stitched into the seams." Rourke stepped back and pulled out his notebook. Let's start from the beginning. Over the next hour, they walked through everything. The day of the disappearance. Paul's debts, rumored but never confirmed. The state of the boat when it was recovered. The silence that followed. And the jacket? He asked finally. Margaret nodded. It was Ethan's, no doubt in my mind. And this shadow in the photo, could it be another person? I don't know, she whispered. But Paul wouldn't let anyone else take their picture unless he trusted them. Vernon cleared his throat. I remember something, maybe, from back then. Margaret turned to him sharply. I never mentioned it, he said, voice low, because it felt stupid. But the morning they left, I was fishing off the other dock across the lake. I saw another boat. It wasn't Paul's. Describe it, Rourke said. Flat-bottomed, white, looked homemade. There was someone in it, a man, I think, just sitting still. Watching. Watching who? Paul. And Ethan. The tent fell silent. Why didn't you say anything back then? Rourke asked, more gently than expected. Because I didn't understand it. It didn't make sense. People come out here all the time. I thought maybe it was just another fisherman. But now, Rourke nodded slowly. Something was wrong with this picture. The wind shifted outside the tent and a faint smell of rain drifted in. He turned back to the photo. That shadow, faint, half-captured, had a shape he'd seen before. The outline of someone holding something long and narrow. Not a rod. A camera. Have this digitized and enhanced, he told the tech. I want to know what that figure is. Then he turned to Margaret. I'm going to reopen this case formally, and I want you involved. Both of you. Margaret's eyes darkened. I never stopped investigating. I just didn't have a badge. Rourke smiled faintly. Now you've got a reason to use one. Outside, the lake was silent, but for the first time in 18 years, the truth had started to stir. The photograph, once scanned and enhanced, revealed more than any of them expected. Not everything. Nothing ever came easy in Spooner, but enough to change the shape of the mystery. The shadowy figure in the left corner was, unmistakably, a man. Tall, lean, standing on the shore just beyond the dock, and he was holding something long and rigid, confirmed by the tech to be an old tripod, the kind used with film cameras in the early 80s. No face, no detail, just a blurred shape wearing a light-colored jacket and what looked like boots. Not Paul, not Margaret, not anyone Margaret could name. Rourke stared at the enhanced image late into the night, fingers steepled, the rest of the station long empty. The glow from his monitor lit up the old incident file beside him. He flipped through it again, slower this time, cross-checking every name mentioned during the original investigation. Nothing stood out, until he found it. One small note scribbled in the margin by a former deputy. Possible witness, William Hoyt, local carpenter, docked nearby. No follow-up. He frowned. William Hoyt. Rourke had grown up near Spooner. That, too, name meant something. He grabbed the old directory and flipped through it. The address was still listed, a property near the western shore of the lake, half a mile from where the Granger boat was last seen. He called Margaret. It was nearly midnight, but she answered on the first ring. I need you to come with me tomorrow, he said. We're visiting someone who may have seen more than he ever told anyone. They drove in silence the next morning. Margaret stared out the window, watching the woods thicken as the road narrowed. Her hands clenched in her lap, knuckles white. Rourke could feel the tension radiating off her. Did Paul know this man? He asked finally. I don't know, she said. But if he was local, they may have crossed paths. Paul did a lot of odd jobs before opening his shop. Carpentry, siding, even built docks one summer. Could be how they met. They turned off onto a gravel path barely wide enough for the cruiser. Pines pressed in on both sides, and the smell of damp earth filled the car. The cabin appeared suddenly, nestled in a clearing. Weathered wood, moss on the shingles, a crooked porch light blinking in the daylight. Rourke parked and stepped out first. The front door opened before he could knock. An older man stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on a cane. His face was deeply lined, his beard a tangle of gray. He didn't look surprised to see them. "Detective," he said. "Took you long enough." Rourke narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Hoyt?" The man nodded. Margaret stepped beside the detective, and the carpenter's eyes landed on her, a flicker of recognition. "Regret. I remember you," he said. "You brought Ethan to the hardware store once. He knocked over a display of nails." Margaret flinched, just slightly. "You were near the lake the day they vanished," Rourke said. Hoyt's grip on the cane tightened. "I was." "Why didn't you come forward?" "I did. Told Deputy Morris what I saw. He told me it wasn't relevant." "What did you see?" Hoyt's eyes shifted to the trees behind them. Then, Paul wasn't alone that morning. Margaret's breath caught. Hoyt stepped back from the door, gesturing for them to come inside. The cabin was sparse, smelled of cedar and pipe smoke. A single chair near the fireplace, a table cluttered with old wood carvings, photos, dust. Hoyt pointed to a worn leather album. "I used to take photos around the lake, had a tripod, took pride in it." Rourke's eyes flicked to Margaret, the shadow in the photo. "I saw Paul early that morning," Hoyt said, voice quieter now. "Saw him walk down the dock with the boy. But then another man came out of the trees, tall, wearing a tan coat. Looked like he knew Paul. They shook hands." "Did they argue?" Margaret asked. "No. But Paul looked tense, like he didn't want Ethan to see the conversation." "Did you hear anything?" "No, too far. I was on the opposite shore, across the inlet, but I took a photo of the lake. Caught them by accident." "Where is it?" Rourke asked. Hoyt shuffled to a drawer and pulled out an old photo sleeve. Inside were dozens of prints, sunsets, fishermen, wildlife. Then he stopped and handed Rourke a faded Polaroid. It was distant, grainy, but clear enough. The dock. Paul and Ethan, and a man standing beside the trees, same height, same coat. "I showed this to the deputy," Hoyt said. "He said it was probably a fisherman, told me to stay out of it." Rourke studied the man. Something about his posture. "Familiar. Do you still have the negatives?" Hoyt shook his head. "Polaroid, no negatives." Rourke nodded and handed the photo to Margaret. Her hands trembled. "That coat," she whispered. "Paul had one like that. Could it be him?" "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "Paul never wore it after spring, too warm. That was someone else." Rourke turned back to Hoyt. "Did you ever see that man again?" Hoyt paused. "Yes." "When?" "About 2 weeks later, alone, on the same shore." "Doing what?" "Staring at the water." The room went still. Margaret pressed the photo against her chest. Rourke stood. He had a new direction now. A new man in the frame, but something still didn't add up. Someone had wanted that box to stay buried, and someone, somewhere, was about to realize it hadn't. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She sat in the small guest room of the local inn, the one with floral curtains and a ticking wall clock that reminded her of Ethan's room. The photo Hoyt had given them lay on the nightstand beside a lamp that flickered occasionally, casting long shadows across the wallpaper. The man in the photo haunted her. His stance, his stillness, the eerie calm in the way he stood just at the edge of the trees. There had been no mention of him in the original reports, no official follow-up, and now, nearly 2 decades later, his face, obscured by blur and distance, felt more real than ever. At 2:17 a.m., Margaret rose, dressed, and walked the 2 blocks to the Spooner police station. She found Rourke still there, hunched over a spread of case files and old town maps. He didn't look surprised to see her. "I can't stop thinking about it," she said, breath clouding in the cold. Why was Paul meeting someone that morning? Why would he bring Ethan if he knew it wasn't safe? Rourke leaned back, rubbing his face. "That's what I've been asking myself, too." He tapped the table where a stack of photocopied receipts lay beside a weathered binder. Found something strange in the property records. Paul withdrew almost $5,000 in cash 2 days before he disappeared. Margaret froze. "No one told me that." It wasn't in the main file. It was buried in the old bank subpoena. Documents. He took it out in small increments over 2 weeks, always at odd hours. Why would he do that? Rourke's eyes narrowed. Maybe to pay someone, or maybe he was planning to run. Margaret's jaw tightened. He wouldn't. Run, you sure? I know the man I married. Rourke didn't push. He just nodded and flipped a page. There's more. A name that popped up twice in background interviews, then vanished. Clay Bronner. Ran a small pawn shop near the edge of town back in the 80s. Closed down years ago. What about him? 2. Witnesses said Paul argued with a man named Clay in the weeks before he vanished. Sheriff's notes say domestic dispute unrelated. And that was it. Margaret felt a chill crawl up her spine. I remember that name, she said. Clay Bronner. Paul mentioned him once. Said he owed him money for some tools. Could be nothing, Rourke said. But Clay Bronner moved out of town in '85, no forwarding address, nothing. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Then we find him. The next morning, Rourke reached out to an old contact at the DMV. By noon, they had a lead, an address registered to a Clay Bronner in Milltown, 40 miles south. Retired, living alone. They drove down that afternoon. The Bronner property was run down. Paint peeled from the siding, and the windows were yellowed with grime. A rusted mailbox leaned sideways in the grass. As they stepped out of the car, a dog barked behind the house, deep and guttural. Rourke knocked twice. No answer. He was about to knock again when the door creaked open. A man stood there, late 60s, tall, sunken cheeks, a thin scar running along his jawline. He squinted at them. You're not selling anything, are you? Clay Bronner? Rourke asked. Who's asking? Detective Rourke, this is Margaret Granger. We're reopening a case from 1984, the disappearance of Paul and Ethan Granger. Bronner's face went still. I got nothing to say. Margaret stepped forward, her voice sharp. You knew Paul. You argued with him. Why? Doesn't matter now. It does to me. My son never came home. Bronner hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, the house was dark and sparse, smelled faintly of smoke and metal. Old newspapers stacked in corners. A single recliner by a silent TV. I sold him some tools, Bronner said, sitting heavily. He owed me $300. We argued. That's it. Did he ever mention trouble, mention someone watching him? Bronner stared at the blank screen. No. But he was nervous that last week. Said he might be clearing out. I thought he meant leaving town. I didn't ask. Did you know anyone named William Hoyt? Rourke asked. Sure. Local weirdo. Liked cameras. Did he ever take pictures of you and Paul? Bronner scoffed. Hell no. Margaret watched his hands. They trembled slightly. You're hiding something, she said. No, I'm not. Then why did you leave town a year after they disappeared? Bronner's jaw clenched. I didn't want trouble. What kind of trouble? Bronner looked up, eyes narrow and defensive. You think I killed them? Rourke didn't answer. He let the silence do the work. Finally, Bronner sighed. Look, there was a guy, came into the shop once asking about Paul, said he was looking for something Paul owed him. Wouldn't give his name, just said he was an old friend from the lake. I figured it was about money. Told him Paul was out fishing that weekend. Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. And he went looking for him. I don't know. Did you ever see him again? No. But a week later, I found a note slipped under my door. What did it say? Bronner's eyes shifted. It said, Don't talk about Paul. People who talk sink fast. Rourke and Margaret exchanged a glance. Do you still have it? Rourke asked. No, Bronner said. I burned it. But Margaret could see it in his eyes. He wasn't telling them everything. Outside, as they stepped back into the fading light, she turned to Rourke. He's afraid, Rourke nodded, which means we're finally getting close. Behind them, a curtain in Bronner's window twitched closed, and somewhere inside, a man sat in the dark, remembering something he swore he'd forget. The next morning, the sun turned. Thin beams of light cut through the fog that had cloaked Spooner for days. But for Margaret, the warmth meant nothing. She stood outside the police station, arms crossed, her back to the lake, as Rourke came out holding a file folder. Got a call early, he said. Local historian, name's Ellis Gage, runs the archives at the Spooner Heritage Center. Says he heard we reopened the Granger case. Margaret raised an eyebrow. And? He says he has something we need to see. 10 minutes later, they pulled into the gravel parking lot of a squat brick building tucked beside the library. Inside, the scent of old paper and mildew clung to the air. Boxes lined the walls, shelves sagged with books, and in the back, under a stained skylight, sat a man in his late 50s with wild gray curls and a tweed jacket worn shiny at the elbows. "Detective Rourke," he said, standing with a smile too polished. "And this must be Margaret. I'm sorry for the long silence, but this town has a way of keeping stories quiet." He gestured to 2 worn chairs across from his desk. "I've been studying this town's forgotten corners for decades," Ellis said, opening a large binder. "When I heard the Granger case had resurfaced, I dug through old submissions, letters, photos, event flyers. People send all kinds of things to the Historical Society, especially after deaths." He flipped a page and laid it flat on the table. A faded black and white photo. "Recognize this?" he asked. Margaret leaned in. It was a 4th of July festival. Flags hung between light poles, kids in paper hats waving sparklers. And in the foreground, unmistakably, Paul Granger holding Ethan on his shoulders. Margaret gasped. "That's from the summer they disappeared." "Exactly," Ellis said. "But it's what's in the background that made me call." Rourke took the photo and squinted. Behind Paul, partially obscured by a food stall, stood a man, tall, tan, goat same build as the figure from the dock photo. Ellis slid over a magnifying glass. Margaret took it. And there he was, not a shadow anymore. A face, barely visible, but enough to see sharp features, a narrow jaw, a glint of something, perhaps a scar or glare on the side of his face. "Who is he?" Rourke asked. Ellis shook his head. "No name, no record. I combed through every local registry, employee list, event volunteer sheet from that summer. He's not in any of them." "Could he have been passing through?" Margaret asked. "Possibly. But this isn't the only place he appears." Ellis opened a second binder. Inside were 4 more photos, all from that same summer. Different community events, the fishing derby, the town fair, a pancake breakfast at the church, and in each one, always near the edge of the frame, that same man. Margaret's skin prickled. He was following them. Ellis nodded slowly. "That's what I think. Not just Paul. Ethan, too." Rourke stood, pacing now. Why would someone follow them for weeks? What were they after? Ellis leaned forward, lowering his voice. There were rumors back then, about a group, not official, not even named. But some locals believed there was an underground network in the region. People who trafficked in identities, relocations, even children. Paul's name came up once in a separate case. What kind of case? Rourke asked. A missing child, 1982. Files were sealed, but Paul had been seen speaking with the boy's mother weeks before she vanished too. Margaret's voice turned sharp. You think Paul was part of something criminal? Ellis held up a hand. I'm saying the opposite. I think he was helping her. The woman was escaping something. Maybe abuse, maybe worse. Paul had tools, skills, and no fear of bending rules. Margaret felt the floor shift beneath her. Are you saying Paul was targeted? I think someone found out, and I think this man in the photos was watching, waiting. Maybe Paul was planning another relocation. Maybe he got caught. Rourke sat again, rubbing his temples. So Paul wasn't running from his past. He was protecting someone, or being hunted for trying. Margaret swallowed hard. Her heart ached, remembering the days leading up to the trip. Paul had been distracted, quiet. He barely touched his dinner. He had kissed her longer than usual that Saturday night. Now, she wondered if he knew, if he'd known something was coming. Why didn't you bring this forward earlier? She asked Ellis. He looked genuinely regretful. I didn't see the pattern until I looked at all the photos together. Separately, he's just another face. Together, he's a ghost hiding in plain sight. Rourke stood. We need copies. high-resolution scans, and we need to know if this man was seen again after 1984. Ellis nodded. Already working on. As they left, Ellis followed them to the door. One more thing, he said. That photo from the 4th of July. It was mailed to the archive anonymously. No return address. Margaret stopped. When? 2 weeks ago. Rourke turned to her. Someone wanted us to find it. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Or to know we're getting close. They stepped out into the light. The town looked the same, but now they knew. Someone had been watching long before that final fishing trip, and someone might still be watching now. The photographs kept Margaret awake again that night. She laid them out on the bed of her motel room, each one angled beneath the lamp, the man in the tan coat haunting every frame, always distant, always near the edges, always watching. He had to be connected, and yet he remained nameless, faceless in official records, absent from every known document or witness report, as if someone had scrubbed him out. At 6:30 a.m., her phone buzzed. It was Rourke. Get dressed, we've got something. 20 minutes later, they stood inside the Spooner Sheriff's evidence room. A deputy, young, nervous, and wide-eyed, met them at the door holding a sealed bag. Inside, a roll of undeveloped film. Where did this come from? Margaret asked. From Vernon, Rourke replied. He cleaned out an old drawer in his garage this morning. Found one of Paul's fishing tackle bags he kept after the search. Said he'd forgotten all about it. Rourke motioned to the technician. We're running it now, should only take a few minutes. Margaret stared at the roll. It was dusty, curled, marked July 1984, in faded ink. Do you think it's Paul's? She asked. Could be. Could be Ethan's. Whoever took it might have caught something, or someone. They waited in silence, the hum of the scanner the only sound. Then the images appeared, one by one, on the monitor. Blurry shots of the lake, Ethan holding a fishing rod, Paul casting his line, a squirrel on a log, a heron mid-flight. And then, frame. 27. Margaret leaned in. It was the dock, their boat, and beyond it the tree line near the edge. A man, tall, watching, not close, not clear, but distinct enough. Margaret's breath hitched. That's him. Rourke nodded, eyes narrowed. Same coat, same posture. The next image, frame 28, was blank, overexposed. Then the film ended. Rourke turned to the tech. Get this printed, cleaned up. I want every pixel examined. Margaret stared at the screen. Ethan had taken that photo. She was sure of it. He'd always played with Paul's old camera. He liked pretending to be a nature spy. And he'd caught something. Something neither of them had realized was important until now. Later that afternoon, Rourke received a call from Madison. The state database team had enhanced the festival photo. Using facial mapping and archival comparison, they identified a potential match from an unrelated investigation in 1983, a man named Richard Dellum, real name unknown, suspected in 2 disappearances in Iowa, never arrested, vanished in the fall of 1984. Margaret felt her stomach turn. He vanished the same year as Paul and Ethan. Rourke nodded grimly. He was under federal investigation, alleged involvement in a relocation for hire scheme. People paid him to disappear, sometimes willingly, sometimes not. Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. So was Paul trying to expose him or use him? We don't know. But if Paul had been in contact with this man, she continued, and then that man disappears the same summer, it means they met. Rourke looked down at his notes. There's more. Dellum was last seen near a lake in northern Wisconsin. Margaret's eyes widened. Spooner? No, about 20 miles east. Small place. Used to be a summer camp. Abandoned in the 70s. He slid a printout across the table. An aerial photo. Dense forest, a cabin, and something else, barely visible. A dirt path leading from the cabin to a private dock. We're going out there, Rourke said. They drove for over an hour through narrow, winding roads until the forest thickened, and the GPS lost signal. The air felt heavier here, colder. The cabin appeared through the trees, sun-bleached and sagging with age. Nature had reclaimed most of. Dewy vines crawled up the siding. The windows were dark and broken. Rourke stepped out first, flashlight in hand. Margaret followed, every crunch of gravel beneath her boots sending a jolt up her spine. Inside, the air was stale with mildew and rot. Dust motes swirled in the beam of light. A chair was overturned. Old newspapers covered the floor. A child's toy truck, rusted and half-buried, sat in the corner. Someone stayed here, Rourke muttered. He moved to the back room, where a door hung loosely on its hinges. Inside, a cot, a pile of rags, a rotting duffel bag, and taped to the wall, a photograph. Rourke froze. Margaret stepped beside him. It was a photo of Ethan smiling, shirtless, at the lake. Margaret let out a choked breath and reached for the wall, steadying herself. "Where did this come from?" she whispered. Rourke didn't answer. He pulled down the photo and turned it over. On the back, in faded pencil, July '84. "He's mine now." Margaret sat on the steps of the abandoned cabin, the photo trembling in her hands. Ethan's smile, so full of life, so unaware. And then that message, "He's mine now." She stared at the words until they stopped meaning anything, until the pencil marks blurred into the paper like veins, until the numbness was the only thing she could feel. Behind her, Rourke moved, through the cabin in silence, photographing every inch. Dust rose with every step. The place felt too intact to be forgotten, as if someone had left, but not long ago. "Whoever stayed here," Rourke said, returning to her side. "They didn't just visit. They lived here. There's signs of regular use, fresh nails in the wall, preserved cans in the cupboard. Someone came back." Margaret didn't look up. "You think Ethan was here?" Rourke hesitated. "I think that photo was taken here. The dock behind him, it matches the shoreline, and the timestamp lines up. But if that's true," she couldn't finish, because the conclusion was unbearable. That Ethan didn't die in that lake. That he was taken. Rourke crouched beside her. "We may be looking at something far bigger than a disappearance. If this Dellum, or whoever he was, had ties to other missing persons, this may have been one of several drop points." Margaret looked at him, her eyes glassy. "Then where's my son?" "I don't know yet, but someone does." She stood abruptly. Her voice had that edge. "Again, sharp and dangerous. I want to go back." "To where?" "To the dock, to the lake, to the place where it all started." Rourke didn't argue. The sun was dipping low as they returned to Spooner. The lake glowed orange and gold beneath the evening sky. The wind had picked up, rippling the surface, stirring old ghosts. Margaret stepped out onto the dock alone. The boards creaked beneath her weight. She closed her eyes and listened. The wind, the water, distant bird song, the echoes of laughter that only lived in memory. She pictured them here, Paul and Ethan, the boat bobbing gently. Sandwiches in the cooler. Rods leaned against the edge, Paul sipping coffee from a thermos, and Ethan always talking, always asking questions, always watching the water with a seriousness beyond his years. She stepped closer to the edge. "I should have been there," she whispered. Behind her, Vernon's voice replied, soft and solemn. "No one could have known." She turned. He stood at the start of the dock, holding something in his hand. A notebook. "This was in the tackle bag," he said. "I didn't notice it at first. It was wedged behind the lining." Margaret took it, hands trembling again. It was water-damaged, swollen at the spine. The pages stuck but not unreadable. The first entries were mundane. Lists of supplies, bait types, dates of fishing trips. Then something changed. A page marked in red pen. "He followed us again. Same guy from the shop. Ethan thinks he's just another camper, but I know better. He watches, always watching. I don't trust him." Then, 2 pages later, "I made the call. Told him I'd meet. Just me. But Ethan insisted on coming. I can't. Shake the feeling that this is the wrong move. But what choice do I have? If I disappear, Margaret will never know why." Margaret's knees gave out. She sat hard on the dock, clutching the notebook to her chest. Paul had known. He'd known something was coming, and he'd tried to leave a trail. Rourke crouched beside her, reading over her shoulder. "He wasn't running," Margaret whispered. "He was protecting us." Rourke stood. "We need to find out who he called. There's a phone number listed in that log, barely legible. I'll have the lab enhance it." She nodded, but her thoughts were already drifting. Paul had left breadcrumbs. Someone had erased them, but not all. She stared out at the water, and something clicked. "What if the boat was never the scene?" she asked. Rourke looked at her. "What do you mean? What if they met him here, on land? What if the lake was just the hiding place?" Rourke's eyes narrowed. "And the boat was a misdirection." She nodded slowly. "They left from this dock. But what if they never got on the boat at all?" They both turned to the tree line, thick woods, endless cover, trails no one walked anymore. Rourke pulled out his flashlight. "Let's check the ridge." They walked in silence, the air growing colder, the trees closing in. 20 minutes into the hike, they found it, a small clearing, hidden by brush, overgrown. In the center, the remains of an old fire pit, and beside it, a fragment of red plastic. Margaret knelt. It was part of a toy, a piece of a walkie-talkie, Ethan's. She knew it before she touched it, the last one he'd carried that summer. Her voice cracked. "He was here." Rourke's flashlight scanned the ground, and then half buried beneath the moss, a bone. Small, white, human. They didn't speak on the walk back. Rourke carried the bone in a sealed evidence pouch, his jaw locked tight. Steps, deliberate. Margaret trailed behind, her legs heavy, her breath uneven. The forest no longer felt like trees and earth. It felt like a witness. Back at the station, a forensic team took over. The clearing was secured. The toy fragment and bone sent for analysis. Margaret sat in the lobby under flickering lights, clutching Ethan's photograph so tightly the corners had bent. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, Rourke stepped into the room, exhaustion deep in his eyes. "It's human," he said quietly. "A child's radius bone, consistent with a boy around Ethan's age." Margaret didn't cry. She just nodded, like her body already knew before the words came. "But there's more," Rourke added. "We found more debris, a second toy, a thread from a jacket sleeve, and footprints, 2 sets, adult male. Estimated weight differences suggest one was dragging something." Margaret's voice cracked. "Do you think he was alive when they left that clearing?" "I don't know yet," but she could see the doubt in his face, the pain of someone who'd followed this kind of trail too many times. She stood slowly, her body leaden. "Then I want to see everything, the map, the photos, the timeline, no more filters." Rourke nodded. They moved into the briefing room, where the evidence board now stretched across 2 full walls. Photos of Paul and Ethan, the jacket, the tackle box, the photographs from Ellis Gage. A line of string connected each discovery in a jagged web. Margaret traced it with her eyes. This man, Dellum or whoever he was, he followed them for weeks. He knew their patterns. He waited. Rourke nodded. And when Paul finally agreed to meet, he brought Ethan anyway. Maybe he thought it was safer that way. Maybe he didn't want to leave him behind. Or maybe, Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper, he never thought he'd come back. Rourke glanced at a new document pinned in the corner. A lab. Port. He handed it to her. Fingerprints recovered from the fishing license inside Ethan's jacket. She scanned it. 1 set belonged to Ethan. The second, a match, Richard Dellum. He had touched it, held it, maybe even planted it, maybe not. But he was there. Margaret stepped back from the board, her head spinning. "Why Ethan?" she whispered. "Why take a child?" Rourke hesitated. Then he pulled out a file from his satchel. "There's something you haven't seen." He opened it on the table. A missing persons report, dated May 1982. A woman named Claire Hennings, and her son, age 9, last. Seen leaving a shelter in Iowa. No sign since. Paul knew her, Rourke said. They exchanged letters. She was planning to relocate, escape her ex-husband. Paul was building a contact network. False IDs, safe houses. All unofficial. All risky. Margaret stared at the paper. So he helped her disappear. Most likely. And someone didn't like that. Della may have been a rival, or part of something darker. Either way, Paul had made an enemy, and Ethan paid the price. She turned to the board again. Something caught her eye. A name, scribbled in pencil on one of the photos Ellis had enhanced. "Whose handwriting is this?" she asked. Rourke squinted. "That's not ours. That was written before the photo reached the archives." The name read Willow Creek. Margaret's pulse quickened. "I know that name. It's not on any maps." It wouldn't be. It was a private trail, old growth. Paul used to take Ethan hiking there, said it was their fort. Rourke leaned in. "Where is it?" She pointed to the map. "Here, south of the ridge. Runs alongside a dried stream bed. No cabins, no traffic, completely secluded." He stood. "Then that's where we're going." An hour later, they pushed through thick brush along the base of the ravine. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. Then they found it. A metal door, half buried in the hillside. A storm shelter, rusted, locked. Rourke stepped forward with a crowbar and pried it open. The hinges groaned. The smell hit them instantly, musty, old, but dry. Flashlights on, they descended a short flight of stairs. The space was small. Cement walls, a single cot, shelves, a water barrel, and in the corner a wooden crate marked with faded letters, Granger. Margaret rushed to it. Inside, journals. Paul's handwriting, dates stretching from 1982 to 1984. She opened the first one. "If you're reading this, I failed." Her breath caught. "I tried to protect them, tried to hide Ethan. But someone knew. Someone always knew. This shelter was the backup plan. I trained him, taught him what to do. If I didn't make it back, I hope he found this place." Margaret fell to her knees. He had prepared. He had fought. He had believed Ethan might survive. And now, after 18 years, the truth was emerging. Layer by painful layer. The shelter was colder than outside, even with their flashlights casting. Halos of warmth. The air inside clung to their skin, heavy with damp earth, rust, and something older. A silence that had waited years to be broken. Margaret sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, her hands trembling as ela virava as páginas do caderno de Paul. Rourke lia por cima do ombro, ambos absorvendo as palavras de homem que nunca voltou. "Para casa. We stayed here 3 nights after the first threat. I taught Ethan how to lock the door, how to stay quiet, where to hide if someone came down those steps. He was scared, but he understood. He always understood more than his age should have allowed." She paused, her voice barely a breath. "He brought Ethan here." Rourke nodded. "And he tried to come back. Another page. I told him I'd return before dawn, but I knew. If I didn't, he had enough food, water, and instructions to last 4 days. After that, he was to go to the road, find Vernon. We rehearsed it. Again and again." Margaret looked up, tears threatening. Vernon never saw him. He never made it out. Rourke pointed to the corner of the room, faint scratch in the cement wall. A tally, 21 marks. "Days?" he said softly. Margaret's heart twisted. He waited. They moved slowly through the shelter, searching every crevice. Beneath the cot, Rourke found a weatherproof box. Inside, a flashlight, water purification tablets, and a small notebook. Not Paul's. Smaller handwriting. Childlike. Ethan's. Margaret pressed it to her chest before opening it. Day 1. Dad left last night. Said he'd be back. I'm scared, but I'm okay. Day 4, no sign of him. I think I heard someone outside, but I stayed still. I didn't say anything. Day 7. I dreamed of Mom. I wish she was here. I think something bad happened. I don't know if I should wait or go. Day 13, I heard a voice. It wasn't Dad. Margaret's voice cracked as she read. Day 15. The door moved. I think someone tried to open it. Then the entries stopped. Margaret looked up. That means someone knew. Someone came here. He didn't leave because he couldn't, because someone stopped him. Rourke moved toward a rusted shelf where a small tin lay wedged behind canned peaches. Inside, a key stamped with a single letter, M. They exchanged a look. Margaret whispered, Milltown. Rourke's eyes lit up. That storage facility we passed near Clay Bronner's place. Milltown Secure Units. He mentioned a place once, didn't he? Somewhere he kept things safe? Margaret nodded slowly. You think Paul left something there? I think. He knew this wouldn't end here. They drove through the night. Rain began to fall halfway through the trip, turning the road into a blur of wipers and headlights. The Milltown storage lot was desolate, lit only by a single floodlight buzzing. Overhead, Unit 34, Rourke unlocked it with the key. The door groaned open. Inside, shelves, boxes, tools, and a steel safe bolted to the back wall. The same key fit. Inside the safe they found a sealed envelope marked, to Margaret, if I don't return. A VHS tape. A folder labeled Dellum. Real name, Matthew Rhines. Rourke opened the folder. Inside were photos. Dozens. All of Dellum or Rhines taken from a distance. Dates, locations, notes in Paul's handwriting, newspaper clippings, surveillance logs, hand-drawn maps of what appeared to be a network of cabins, drop sites, and codes. Paul hadn't just been hiding. He had been hunting, and he was close. Margaret opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Margaret, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it back, but I need you to know it was never about running. I wasn't scared for myself, I was scared for Ethan. Someone found me. A man named Matthew Rhines. He knew things about my past, things I buried. But this wasn't revenge, this was bigger. He was taking children, Margaret, not for ransom, not for adoption, for something darker. I got too close. If Ethan is with you, hold him, run. If he's not, go to the shelter, he knows it. I left him what he needs. I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. Paul. Margaret's tears fell silently onto the page. 18 years. Of silence. 18 years of doubt, blame, and grief. And here in her hands was the proof she had waited for. Paul had died protecting their son. And Ethan. Ethan had survived longer than anyone imagined. They turned to the tape. Back at the Spooner station, the techs found an old VHS player. The screen crackled, then stabilized. It was Ethan. In the shelter, wearing the same windbreaker, looking into the, camera. Hi, Mom, he said, voice small but steady. Dad told me to wait here. He said you might find this one day. If you do, I hope you're okay. I love you. I miss you. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to try. I'm going to get out. The screen went black. Margaret clutched her chest. He had tried. And now, there was still a chance he had made it. The day Ethan came home, the sky was gray, not stormy, not broken, just still, like the air itself was waiting. Margaret stood on the porch of her house, the same one Paul had built with his own hands, clutching the VHS tape and watching the driveway. The news had broken 2 days. Earlier, a missing persons alert in Iron River, Michigan, matched with DNA sent from Spooner. A young man in his 20s, working under the name Noah Bishop, had been found living in a halfway shelter after a health emergency. His fingerprints triggered a hit. The boy once presumed drowned was alive, and when authorities told him who really was, he didn't believe them. Not at first, but then they showed him the video, the one he had recorded, the shelter, his own voice. Hi, Mom. Now, she waited. The car pulled in slowly, gravel crunching under the tires. The door opened, and there he was. Taller, thinner, a faded scar along his jaw, eyes that held storms he had never spoken aloud. Margaret didn't move. She couldn't. He stepped forward, uncertain. A breath. Another. Then he whispered, Mom? She ran to him, arms wrapped tight. Tears broke. He trembled in her embrace, and for a moment, 18 years folded into nothing. Just a boy. And his mother. and the truth between them. Inside, Ethan sat on the old couch, his hands shaking as he sipped from a cup of tea. Margaret sat beside him, never letting go of his arm. Rourke stood near the window, letting the moment breathe. Ethan's voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. I waited for Dad for days. He didn't come. Then a man came. Margaret's heart clenched. He had keys. He called himself Matthew. He said Dad had sent him. I believed him at first, but he lied. He took me away. He looked down. I don't remember everything. Some of it's blank. Other parts, I wish they were. He paused. I ran when I was 13. Changed my name. Lived off the grid. I didn't know if you were alive. I didn't want to believe you were dead, but I didn't know how to find you. Margaret took his hand. You found me, she said. That's all that matters now. Rourke stepped forward gently. Ethan, do you know what happened to Paul? To your dad? Ethan closed his eyes. I never saw him again after that night. But Matthew talked. He said Dad got what he deserved for interfering. I think he killed him, and then used me as a warning. A heavy silence fell. Margaret's voice was steady. He didn't win. No, Rourke said. He didn't. Because days earlier, using Paul's file and maps, authorities had tracked the last cabin location, hidden deep in Wisconsin's northern border, near an old ranger outpost. Inside, they found remains. Human.male dental records confirmed it. Paul Granger. He had died sometime in late July 1984. A single bullet wound to the chest, likely ambushed, but near the body, under a loose floorboard, was a notebook. His final entry, I don't regret it, not for 1 second. If Ethan makes it out, then I did my job. Tell Margaret I love her. Tell Ethan, be who I couldn't. Margaret buried Paul 3 days later. She chose the hillside by the lake, the place they first fished as a family. Ethan helped carry the casket. Vernon spoke. Even Hoyt came, silent and pale, placing a single carved wooden fish on the grave. Afterward, Rourke handed Margaret a file. Matthew Rhines, he said, or Dellum, or whatever name he used last. He's dead. Died in a hit-and-run in Colorado in 2001. False ID, buried under unknown. But it's him. Same fingerprints. Margaret stared at the name. No trial. No justice. But at least no more children would vanish at his hands. Days passed. Then weeks. Ethan stayed. He walked the trails Paul had mapped, ate toast with too much butter, sat on the dock every morning, watching the lake. He didn't talk much. But Margaret didn't press. One evening he found her folding laundry and asked softly, was he really trying to save people? She nodded. He saved you. Ethan looked out the window. Then I want to help people too. Margaret smiled, eyes wet. You already are. On the anniversary of Paul's disappearance, they lit a lantern and let it drift across the lake. It floated for a long time, a tiny flame in the dusk, before vanishing beyond the reeds. Margaret stood beside her son, no longer wondering, no longer waiting. The answers had come, painful, beautiful, complete. Paul was gone but not lost, and Ethan was home. At last.